Imagine an entire planet lifting its voice in defiance and uttering a single word: no, no to the Imperium of Man. No to the God Emperor of mankind himself. It sounds like pure suicide, and in many ways it is, yet in the grim darkness of the far future, even this supposedly impossible act has occurred. Worlds once sworn to the Emperor's service have, on rare and terrible occasions, dared to reject him and his rule. The real question is what comes after that. What happens when a world bred from birth to worship the Emperor as a living god chooses to turn away and rebel? In a galaxy where loyalty is law and heresy is the darkest crime imaginable, the response is every bit as savage as you'd expect. An imperial world that says no to the Emperor is no longer an imperial world at all. It becomes a battlefield, a target of wrath. And if it cannot be brought to heel, it becomes an example. The tale of such a world's fate is a cautionary one, full of despair, fire, and a kind of bleak irony, because the Imperium doesn't just let you walk away ever. So, let's dive into this morbid scenario and peel back every layer of it. From the first treacherous spark of defiance to the all-consuming war that follows to the ashes that remain at the end, we'll explore it all. Why would a planet ever make this choice? How does the Imperium respond to such betrayal? And is there ever any chance of victory or even survival for those who choose to defy the God Emperor's will? Brace yourself. This is not a happy story. But then in Warhammer 40,000, happy stories are in short supply. What you're about to witness is the anatomy of a planetary rebellion in the Imperium of Man. It's grim, it's dark, and it might even be a little absurd in its horror. Our journey begins with understanding the why, the spark that lights the heretical flame. Why would anyone, let alone an entire world, reject the Emperor's light? What could drive them to such madness? Why rebel? For a planet to defy the Imperium, something must have pushed it to the brink. By default, Imperial citizens are taught from birth that the Emperor is everything, their god, their protector, the very reason humanity still exists. Saying no to him is saying no to mankind itself, according to Imperial creed. So, what could possibly drive an entire world into such rebellion? In truth, there are a few recurring themes, none of them good and all of them desperate in one way or one major catalyst is crushing burdens and sheer desperation. Often, it starts with the brutal weight of imperial demands breaking a world's back. Every imperial planet owes heavy tithes in manpower, in material, or both. There's a quota of soldiers to raise or to mine, grain to ship or taxes to deliver, and falling short is not really an option. Most planets grit their teeth and give even when it hurts. But what about when there's nothing left to give? Picture a struggling world that has sent millions of its sons and daughters off to distant wars year after year, until its own factories and farms are short-handed. The fields lie low, the planetary defense forces are under strength, all because so many able-bodied workers and soldiers have been tithed away to feed the Imperium's endless wars. Then the next demand comes, say, yet another regiment of troops, or a double shipment of grain, and finally, the planetary governor throws up her hands and says no more. We can't. It's technically a refusal even if it's made out of sheer inability rather than active disloyalty. How do you think the Imperium responds to such a plea with understanding and leniency? Hardly. There is no line in the administrative rulebook for "we cannot comply." To the bureaucrats on Terra, cannot sounds like will not, and will not is simply treachery. In one recorded case, a governor who begged for relief from troop levies because her planet had been bled dry, fending off repeated Xenos raids, was accused of sedition on the spot. The Imperial envoy essentially told her that duty to the Emperor trumps the planet's survival. Her refusal to send yet more regiments was deemed open rebellion. The end result: the Imperium bombarded her world with far more troops and firepower than it had ever asked from her, forcibly taking what they wanted and then some. The dark irony wasn't lost on anyone. She warned that giving away another chunk of her population would doom the planet, and that their gods, whether they name them or not, will bring prosperity or revenge. Maybe the planetary governor himself is seduced by whispers from a demon offering him unimaginable power. If he only forsakes his oaths to the Imperium, once the rot of chaos sets in, the trajectory is ghastly. You'll see things that make any common bureaucratic dispute look tame. Mass orgies of violence and debauchery, witchcraft and sorcery unleashed, mutations appearing among the populace as they give in to warp influences. By the time an Imperial official realizes a whole planet has said no under the influence of chaos, the planet might not even resemble what it was. It could be one giant blood-soaked altar to the dark gods. At that point, the world isn't simply in rebellion, it's an act of warfare against the Emperor's soul. The troubling part, as if that isn't troubling enough, is that often such chaos rebellions don't even want independence. They might actually want to provoke Imperial intervention as a grand offering to chaos. Think of a corn cult reign in the bloodshed of the coming war. Or they want to destabilize the Imperium as a whole. In any event, the Imperium's response to a chaos-tainted world is usually swift and merciless. Space Marines known as Grey Knights might be dispatched if demons are involved, and they will not hesitate to kill half the planet's population to banish a demon lord. Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus or Ordo Malus will sanction extermination protocols with frightening readiness, whereas a world that rebelled over taxes might be allowed back into the fold after a beating. A world that turned to chaos will almost certainly be purged utterly. The Imperium's attitude is that it's better to lose the planet entirely than to let a demon-haunted or chaos-controlled world persist. We can't forget Xenos influence either the enemy without as opposed to the enemy within. There are cases where alien forces are the ones pulling the strings of a human rebellion, or at least capitalizing on it. Two frequent offenders are gene stealers and the Toei Empire. Gene stealer cults are a particularly devious threat. A gene-ealer is a Xenos creature that infects humans with its genetic material, creating hybrid offspring and a psychic bond that makes the infected individuals fanatically loyal to the future arrival of the Tyranids, a race of all-devouring aliens. Essentially, they're worshipping an incoming apocalypse. These cults operate in secret for years, even decades. They infiltrate the underhives, the PDF, the administrators, spreading their taint quietly. They often adopt populist rhetoric to win converts. Slogans like "We the downtrodden workers must throw off our cruel overlords," or "The Emperor has abandoned us, salvation lies with the true Star Children," not explicitly mentioning that those Star Children are ravenous extragalactic monsters that will consume everyone. By the time Imperial authorities catch on, the Gene Stealer cult might have half the planet under its sway. Then comes the uprising, a planet-wide revolt against Imperial authority. oftentimes just as a Tyranid hive fleet is approaching the system. The cultists believe wrongly but fervently that when the Tyranids arrive they'll be elevated or rewarded. In truth, they are just helping soften up the planet for consumption. Now, to an outside observer, this looks like a planet rejecting the Emperor under a bizarre alien-inspired creed, and that's exactly what it is. The Imperium's response to confirmed gene stealer infestation is similar to chaos in some ways, extreme and terminal. If the cult is discovered early, maybe a purge can excise it and the world can be saved. But if the rot is too widespread, they will quarantine and scour the planet clean. They have little choice. If they hesitate, the Tyranids will show up and do worse. As for the Tau Empire, unlike the mindless Tyranids, the Taui come with a smile, a handshake, and an offer of alliance. They have over the years successfully convinced some human worlds, mostly on the eastern fringe of the galaxy near Taui territory, to secede from the Imperium and join the Tau's realm. The Tau ideology of the greater good can sound almost reasonable to disillusioned humans. A promise of unity, technological uplift, and peace with some fine print. Naturally, like giving up certain freedoms and accepting Tau leadership to a world that's been suffering under the Imperium's heavy hand, the Tau can appear as saviors or liberators. We have accounts of planetary governors making secret treaties with nearby Tau commanders, arranging for a transition of power. One day the planet stops transmitting to Imperial authorities, and when an Imperial ship finally swings by, they find the populace waving Tau banners and welcoming blue-kinned aliens as comrades. It doesn't even require a violent uprising. In some cases it might be a relatively bloodless coup where the Pro-Tau faction takes control smoothly. However, the moment that news reaches the Imperium, they categorize it as outright treason and heresy. Consorting with Xenos is one of the big no-nos, right up there with worshipping chaos. The Tau themselves might try to defend their new human allies, which means any Imperial punitive force has to deal with well-armed, well-organized alien military units too. That complicates things, but it doesn't deter the Imperium. If anything, it enrages them more. Those human traitors become high-priority targets when the Imperium musters the resources to strike back. It might not happen immediately. The eastern fringe is distant, and wars with the Tau can be costly and time-consuming. But the Imperium holds grudges. One day a crusade fleet will arrive to reclaim that world for the Emperor, and woe beside any Tau or human who stands in the way. In these scenarios, the initial rebellion might have been quiet, but the reconquest will be loud and devastating. To this day, there are a few human colony worlds that live under Tau governance rather than Imperial, a lasting stain on the record. Those humans known as the Geisa, Tau'd word for human helpers, are considered traitors by the Imperium even if decades have passed since their defection. It may take centuries, but the Imperium does not forget. Whenever it strengthens its hold in that region, those worlds know a reckoning will come. The greater good will not save them when the Imperial Navy arrives in orbit with wrath and righteous fury. The existence of these Tau-allied humans is a thorn in the side of Imperial commanders, a constant reminder that some of mankind chose servitude to aliens over loyalty to the Emperor. Such a thing cannot be allowed to stand indefinitely. Finally, there's a scenario that isn't so much about malice or outside influence, sheer isolation and divergence. The Imperium is huge and often poorly connected. Some worlds simply slip through the cracks. Perhaps a warp storm severs force. Do not let the Imperial tithe ships land. The PDF, following the conspirators' instructions, suddenly turned their guns on a shuttle of Imperial tax collectors or a platoon of arbitrators from off-world, gunning them down rather than allowing them to set foot on the soil, or the planet's orbital defense stations, which normally salute arriving Imperial Navy vessels, instead open fire on them without warning. Picture an Imperial envoy ship coming into dock expecting the usual red carpet welcome, and boom, a defense laser turns it into a ball of plasma that sends a crystal clear message before any words are spoken. Often there's violence against representatives of Imperial authority on world. The Adeptus Arbitus, the Imperium's militarized law enforcers, are usually among the first targets. These arbitrators are hardcore loyalists, an arm of Imperial justice that never negotiates with rebels, and everyone knows it. So rebel leadership will attempt to neutralize them immediately. Rebel PDF units might surround the Arbit's precinct fortress in the capital and assault it, or stage an accident that blows it sky high. If the Arbites are caught off guard, their stronghold falls in bloody street fighting, or they get massacred in their precinct houses. If they catch wind, they'll dig in and fight to the last bolt shell. Arbites have been known to hold out for weeks even as the city around them falls, but generally if the rebellion is widespread, sheer numbers will overwhelm the Arbites eventually. The same goes for any Imperial Guard garrison stationed there. Sometimes a guard regiment is posted to a world if they remain loyal to the Emperor while the locals rebel. Oh boy, that's essentially war immediately. Then there's the ecclesiarchy, the priests and bishops of the imperial cult. If the rebellion is anti-imperial but not explicitly anti-emperor, for example, the rebels claim they're still faithful but hate the administrator's tyranny, they might try to leave the local minorum alone or even co-opt them. Perhaps the planetary leaders say, "We still love the emperor. We're doing this for him. It's those corrupt bureaucrats on Terra we reject," hoping the clergy will support or at least not oppose them. In some cases, a high-ranking cleric might indeed side with the rebels, especially if the church on that world had its own gripes or was led by a secret heretic. But more often the ecclesia is a thorn in the rebels' side. Most Ministorum priests will instinctively oppose anyone defying the wider Imperium. To them, the Imperium is the Emperor's will made manifest. So you can bet they'll call the rebel leaders heretics and call on the populace to resist. This can lead to really nasty scenarios. Imagine on the day of rebellion, preachers in the Hive city squares booming through loud hailers. Do not be deceived. This is heresy. Remain loyal. While rebel tanks roll by trying to disperse the crowds, the rebels might have to drag beloved local priests out of their pulpits and execute them publicly to snuff out that moral authority, which in turn can shock and cow some citizens or enrage others. Either way, it's a bloody mess. If the ecclesiarchy presence is strong, say there's a cardinal or a convent of battle sisters on world, an uprising might even fail at this stage because the faithful rally en masse on world steeped in devotion, and order from a priest to take up arms for the emperor could spur 1 million citizens into a spontaneous loyalist militia. Of course, then you get civil war within the civil war. Neighbor versus neighbor, church-led zealots versus rebel PDF, tearing the world apart even before the Imperium proper intervenes. This highlights an important truth. Even if a planet says no as a whole, it's rarely literally everyone on the planet unifying in defiance. There are always factions and individuals who remain loyal to the Emperor, or at least fearful of what this rebellion will bring. especially initially. Dissent within the rebellion itself will exist. A planetary governor might have his palace guard and some regiments on his side, but perhaps the Navy crew at the orbital station hesitates, so the rebels might have to send a boarding party to seize that station by force, or a province or city governed by a particularly pious noble refuses to join the uprising, essentially declaring their own mini-rebellion against the rebel authority in the Emperor's name. The result? The planet plunges into internal conflict almost immediately. It could be quick if the rebel conspirators had a super tight plan and eliminated opposition in one strike, decapitating all Imperial loyal officers and broadcasting unified propaganda so fast that resistance can't coalesce. But more often there's at least some period of chaos and civil strife. Loyalist holdouts versus rebel forces, firefights in the streets, sabotage, confusion among the populace. If the rebellion was fermented by something like a chaos cult or gene stealer cult, then this initial phase is especially chaotic. No pun intended. You might see outright massacres. Cultists rise up from hiding and start slaughtering known Imperial loyalists, sacking the governor's mansion if he wasn't with them, or bombing the Adeptus Administratum offices. Meanwhile, terrified civilians lock their doors or join whichever side seems less likely to kill them on the spot. Insane propaganda broadcasts might loop on the Vox network. Citizens, cast off your chains, embrace the new truth, or conversely, from loyalist pockets, remain calm. The Emperor's forces will come. Do not give in. Rumors spread like wildfire. 1 hour people hear the governor has declared independence. The next they hear Space Marines are already en route to punish them. Often not true that quickly, but fear runs high. Now, assuming the rebels manage to gain the upper hand and secure control over most of the planet's institutions, they've killed or imprisoned the Imperial officials who wouldn't play ball, silenced the outspoken loyalists, and cowed the populace. What then? Now the rebel leadership faces a very nervous question. What will the Imperium do when they find out? Because they know the response will be fierce. Any sane rebel governor realizes that by stepping over this line they've basically invited a galactic superpower to kick down their door in the near future. So they have a few choices, none of them great. One move is to hide it for as long as possible. Censor astropathic communications, jam outbound signals, maybe even let scheduled tithes continue in a token way if they have some stockpiles to delay suspicion. Essentially play along as if nothing has changed, at least externally, buying time to fortify. However, this only works until the next Imperial visit or missed shipment. It's a delaying tactic at best, and astropaths, those psychers who send messages through the warp, are hard to completely silence. The rebels might try to coerce their astropathic choir to keep quiet, or more likely they'll try to neutralize them, imprison them, or sadly kill them. Many a coup begins with an attempt to seize the Astropathica enclave and Vox transmitters so that the planet is effectively muted. But loyalist astropaths might get a psychic scream out into the void before being caught. Something as simple as a fragmented message. World ex-governor traitors. Planet entirely. Chaos war bands will aid you only to drag you into damnation. Pirates may just take payment and run. But from the rebels' perspective, any port in a storm, right? They'll gamble on things that would have been unthinkable when they were still loyal Imperial subjects. Meanwhile, beyond the atmosphere, the wheels of Imperial retribution may already be turning. It could be that even as the rebel leader is making rousing speeches and hastily stringing barbed wire on the beaches, astropathic messages are zipping through the warp to Sector Command, alerting the Imperium. Planet X has fallen from the Emperor's grace. Send forces. If the rebels were extremely thorough and no word got out immediately, they might get a bit more breathing room, but eventually someone will notice something's off. Tithes not arriving. Scheduled communications missed. A visiting rogue trader or Mechanicus envoy stops by and gets a cold shoulder, or sees the wrong flag flying and word gets out. The Imperium has billions of eyes. It's hard to hide a whole world status for long. So, at this stage, the planet is under new management, bracing itself, and perhaps enjoying a fleeting moment of triumph for the rebels and dread for the loyalists in hiding. The populace is likely tense and afraid, regardless of which side they're on, because everyone knows that a storm is coming. It's just a question of when. Back in the halls of imperial power, whether a sector governor's palace, an inquisitor's sanctum, or a fleet command deck, the reaction to news of a planet's rebellion is unambiguous: rage and resolve. The very instant it's confirmed that an imperial world has turned traitor, a machine that's been honed over millennia kicks into gear. Administratum clerks red ink the planet's name in ledger books with labels like in extremist and subject pacification. Astropaths begin flashing emergency communicates to any imperial forces nearby. An inquisitor may get a priority message. A Space Marine chapter master might receive a tour request for intervention. The Segmentum Battle Fleet Command is certainly alerted to mobilize. The exact chain of command can vary. Sometimes the Inquisition declares the planet excommunicate traitorous on the spot, especially if heresy or Xenos are suspected, basically marking it for extreme sanction. Other times, the sector governor issues a formal decree of rebellion and raises a crusade force. Either way, one outcome is certain: the Imperium will respond with overwhelming military force. There's an old saying in the Administratum: make a plan, and the Emperor laughs. But when it comes to quashing rebellion, the Imperium doesn't see much humor. They have a playbook. First, they assess the situation. How many rebels? How well armed? Any chance of internal loyalists still holding out? Is there time to be surgical, or do we go in guns blazing? If an inquisitor is in the loop, they'll be evaluating any signs of chaos or alien influence, because that might upgrade the threat level from rebellious province to planetary contamination, which in turn upgrades the response from reclaim it to purge it entirely. Let's say our hypothetical rebellious planet is deemed salvageable. No obvious demon portals swallowing cities or gene stealer biomass jungles choking the streets. The Imperium will assemble a task force proportionate to the perceived defiance, and in typical Imperial fashion, they often err on the side of absurd overkill. Why send one regiment when 10 will do? Why send a squadron of cruisers when you can deploy a whole battle fleet? They want not only to crush the rebellion, but to make a terrifying example out of it. Surrounding planetary governors should be able to see the smoke from light years away, metaphorically speaking, and remember to stay in line. Over the following weeks or months, forces converge. from a nearby system. Perhaps a detachment of the Imperial Navy's warships is rerouted. Massive troop transports begin mustering Imperial Guard regiments. These could be drawn from other planets in the same sector. Often neighboring worlds are ordered to contribute forces to punish their wayward cousin. Sometimes units that originally hailed from the now rebel planet, but were off-world, say fighting elsewhere, are reassigned to the relief force. Imagine the awkwardness and fury of soldiers going to subdue their own home world turned traitor. If available, one or more Space Marine chapters might volunteer or be petitioned to assist. The Adeptuses have their own pride and often hate rebellion since it reminds them deep down of the Horus heresy, their greatest shame. If a chapter like the Ultramarines or Imperial Fists is in range, you may well get a company or 3 of power-armored Angels of Death dropping in for a righteous purge. If the rebellion has any whiff of blasphemy, the Ecclesiarchy could dispatch the Adeptus Sororitas, Sisters of Battle, essentially the Church's armored fanatics eager to cleanse heresy with flame. The Adeptus Mechanicus might toss in a manipula of battle automata, or even a god engine from a Titan. Legio if the world's heresy endangers their forge interests, especially if the rebel world was providing some key resource they want to secure, and certainly an Inquisitor or their agents will tag along if they aren't outright commanding the whole show. In short, the Imperium gathers a crushing hammer, all aimed at the misbehaving planet. It's not always immediate. Coordination and warp travel take time. In a best-case scenario for the Imperium, worst case for the rebels, there's already a fleet in the sector finishing up some other operation that can be redirected swiftly. In other instances, if the rebellion happened in a relatively quiet region, they might need to wait for reinforcements from a sector capital far away. This could mean the rebels get a grace period of months, perhaps even a year or 2 before the storm breaks. Those among the rebels who are genre-savvy or historically aware know this, and likely spend each day fortifying with a growing knot in their stomach. The Emperor's wrath may be slow, but it is inevitable. Now when the Imperial forces arrive, they may attempt a little formality, if only to tick the bureaucratic box that we gave them a chance, typically a final ultimatum. Above her, the shockwave of that impact blows out the hab's windows and causes her ears to bleed. Her toddler starts screaming from the pressure change and pain. She holds him tight, tears in her eyes, praying for this nightmare to end. The nightmare is only beginning. Now come the landing forces. If Space Marines are involved, they might have already made a surgical strike before the main landings. For example, dropping in via assault pod straight into the heart of the enemy command structure. Indeed, a Space Marine chapter, say the Ultramarines, or a more unforgiving chapter like the Minotaurs, might volunteer to spearhead the assault as an honor. When they do, it's almost unfair how effective it is. One moment, the rebel generals in their bunker think they have a plan. The next, the ceiling blows open, and 8-foot tall super soldiers in ceramite armor are crashing through bolters roaring, and a start strike can decapitate a whole defensive network within an hour of the war start. They'll target the rebel leadership, anti-orbital laser batteries, shield generators if any, and other high-value targets. It's shock and awe incarnate. An example scenario. a rebel governor's final moments being a pair of enormous transhuman warriors bursting into his throne room, giving him one last chance to kneel if he's lucky, then executing him on the spot when he inevitably reaches for a weapon or a defiant word. The Iron Talons chapter of Space Marines did exactly this in one rebellion, slaying the secessionist governor and his guards in one fell swoop. It was efficient, but also a bit frightening to the Imperials themselves, because it shows just how lethal Marines are when turned loose on normal humans. One Inquisitor noted that unleashing Space Marines on an Imperial population, even a traitorous one, is only one step short of exterminatus in terms of overkill. The Space Marines tear into the rebel defenders with shocking violence. Rebel troopers who had never even seen a Space Marine before quail at the sight of giants in adamantine plate charging through the smoke. One PDF squad makes the mistake of standing their ground and firing. The Marines barely slow down, bolt rounds blowing the unfortunate defenders apart a heartbeat later. Another group flees, tossing aside weapons and running for the vaults. A hulking Terminator in the Marines' ranks cuts them off, a sweep of his power fist, literally smashing a fleeing soldier into a wall with bone-splattering force. In the span of maybe 2 minutes, halls that had been filled with shouting and lasfire are reduced to silence, save for the heavy footfalls of a star stepping over gore-soaked floor tiles. It's as much a psychological assault as a physical one. Any rebels still alive in the vicinity realize that what they face are no mere men at all, but the Emperor's angels of death from the old legends. Some throw down their arms and beg for mercy. They receive none. Others simply freeze in terror, unable to fight or flee. The Iron Talons press on with machine efficiency, securing the planet's palace level by level, leaving only the dead in their wake. Rebel troopers in other areas might manage some successes against lesser forces, but once Marines have done their spearhead work and knocked out key defenses, the mass assault begins. Huge landers and drop ships scream through the atmosphere, braving any remaining ground fire. There's always some unlucky pilot who catches a missile, but the majority get through. They deploy the Imperial Guard regiments in waves, depending on the planet's geography. This could involve securing a spaceport as a beachhead or dropping directly into open fields and establishing a forward base, often at least one relatively flat zone, a desert plain outside a hive city, or a coastal port facility, is chosen as the primary landing site. The rebels might concentrate forces there to oppose the beachhead, but if orbit is lost, it's hard to stop the Imperium from landing troops somewhere. They've got teleportation arrays for elite units, grav chutes for airborne infantry, and sometimes they just brute force it. Drop a regiment of Cadian shock troops into the outskirts of a city, and let them fight block by block. Now the war truly grinds on in earnest, and it is hell on Earth, or whatever Earth-like planet it is. The rebels, knowing their backs are against the wall, often fight ferociously. Some are fanatical, especially if chaos or cult conditioning is involved. Others are simply desperate not to be executed as traitors and hoping that if they can inflict enough casualties, maybe the Imperium will reconsider. Spoiler, the Imperium won't. The Imperial Guard, for their part, unleash the Emperor's wrath with a zealous mix of vengeance and duty. Many guardsmen harbor a special contempt for human traitors. They'll often be heard shouting, "Remember Cadia," or for the Emperor, as they storm trenches, taking out their frustrations at the galaxy's endless threats on these fellow humans who dare to make it even harder by turning coat.
Let's zoom in on a likely scene. The primary hive city that serves as the planetary capital. Its lower levels and spires have become battlefields. Street by street, guardsmen advance behind armored columns. Lehman Russ battle tanks chugging forward. Heavy bolters thudding. Rebels have barricaded the avenues with overturned haulers and sandbags. They respond with lost gun and auto gun fire from windows and makeshift bunkers. Civilians, those who haven't fled or been conscripted, cower in Hablock basements praying for it all to end. A unit of insurgent militia, maybe factory workers handed rifles, sprays wildly at the oncoming Imperial troops. In return, a Basilisk artillery tank miles away lobs a shell that obliterates half the HAB block therein. The brutality is beyond anything they'd imagined when they first dreamed of freedom. Lynn's rubble and shattered Imperial icons mix in the smoking ruins of a marketplace. Overhead, Imperial Navy fighters and gunships streak by, dueling with the last of the rebel air forces. Perhaps the rebels managed to convert some cargo haulers into makeshift bombers or held onto a few atmospheric fighters. They'll score a few victories. Maybe a valiant rebel pilot shoots down a Thunderbolt fighter here, or a lucky ground-launched missile blows an Imperial Valkyrie out of the sky there. These small successes are inevitable in war, but they don't change the course. They're footnotes in the eventual Imperial victory report. In the heat of the battle there may be moments of heroism and horror on both sides. A rebel tank ace ambushes an Imperial armored column in the ruins of
something worse could rear its head.
Many a guardsman has gone into a rebellion suppression expecting to fight mortal traitors, only to find themselves facing gibbering mutants or an armored Chaos Space Marine leading the rebels.
Those moments are terrifying, but the Imperium plans for them too. Elite units like the Inquisition Stormtroopers or a Death Watch kill team might be embedded for exactly that reason, to handle the freak show elements while the rank and file handle the regular traitor guardsmen. One way or another, after a period of intense combat, it could be days, weeks, or months for a big world, the organized rebel resistance is broken. The planetary defense force of the traitors is annihilated or surrenders in scattered pockets. Their leaders are dead in chains or on the run. Not that there's anywhere to run. The Navy has likely cordoned off the system. Imperial tanks are patrolling the streets of every major city, crunching over debris and graffiti that said "Imperium Go Home." Now partially charred off the walls, the air is thick with the dust of bombardment and the accurate stench of promethium from all those flamethrowers that cleared out bunkers. Victory, such as it is, belongs to the Imperium. The planet is formally back under Imperial control. But the cost. Oh, the cost. If you were an ordinary citizen of this world, you have just lived through a nightmare. Your cities may lie in ruins. Your sons and daughters who fought on either side are likely dead or maimed. Your infrastructure is shattered. The victorious Imperial troops are not exactly gentle liberators. They're more like conquerors who now look around with a "what now" expression, boots bloodied and trigger fingers still itchy. The planet lies prostrate, awaiting whatever punishment or restructuring the Imperium will decree next. Before we talk about that aftermath, take a moment to consider this entire war. This apocalypse that rolled over the world was essentially the answer to that one word. No. The rebels said no, we won't obey. And the Imperium answered with bolters, last fire, and orbital fire until no became no one left to keep fighting. When the smoke finally clears and the last gunshots fade, the aftermath begins. A phase perhaps just as brutal in its own way. The planet lies at the mercy of the Imperium, not that mercy is a common Imperial trait. Now comes the reckoning. Immediate retribution. First on the agenda is making an example of the traitors. Any rebel leaders who were captured alive, the governor, his generals, high-ranking officials, cult priests, etc., are in for a very short and unpleasant future. There might be a summary tribunal led by an inquisitor or a commissar where the verdict is a foregone conclusion. If they're lucky, they get a swift execution by firing squad. If they're not, public executions become the order of the day. The Imperium loves a good public execution to drive the point home. So in the biggest plaza of the capital, or what's left of it, they'll stage a grand spectacle. The traitor governor and his inner circle paraded out in chains, forced to their knees before a gathering of cowed survivors. Perhaps a sermon is delivered by a fiery confessor of the ecclesiarchy, condemning their souls to oblivion. Then heads roll literally if a power sword or guillotine is used. Or in an even more theatrical twist, the Arbites could hang them from the ruins of the governor's own palace balcony. It's a grim spectacle. The Imperium turning the ruins of rebellion into a stage for renewed obedience. And yes, people are forced to watch. Attendance may be mandatory for all surviving citizens. So the lesson sears itself into collective memory, but punishment doesn't stop at the top. The purge runs deep. The Imperial forces fan out and round up anyone suspected of having significantly aided the rebellion. PDF officers, local officials who threw in their lot with the traitor government, propagandists who gave speeches in favor of independence, even factory bosses who redirected supplies to rebel armies. All of them become candidates for execution or harsh labor sentences. The definition of traitor can be very broad when the victors are doing the categorizing. Some poor citizens might be summarily shot just for having worn a rebel armband or shouted support at the wrong rally. The attitude of the conquering force is usually, let the Emperor sort them out. They'd rather err on the side of eliminating any possible seditious element than risk leaving embers that could reignite. Those not immediately executed might face other fates. For example, inquisitors sometimes consign select high-value traitors to a living death of servitude as mind-wiped servitors. Part man, part machine drones devoid of personality. A rebellion's tech-adept leader, for instance, could find himself lobotomized and wired into a labor engine as punishment, forced to toil until his augmented body gives out. Others might be shipped off-world to penal colonies or inducted under heavy watch into penal legion military units. Effectively a delayed death sentence wearing the guise of a second chance. The Imperium's retribution has many shades of horror, not all as quick as a firing squad. Inquisitorial presence. If the rebellion had any whiff of heresy, and which rebellion doesn't from the Imperium's perspective, the Inquisition will be heavily involved in the aftermath. Inquisitors, particularly of the Order Hereticus, the branch that deals with heresy and internal betrayal, might conduct rigorous investigations and interrogations. Entire populations can be subjected to purity tests. This could be as straightforward as gathering townsfolk and making them recite loyalty oaths until someone slips up, or as exotic and horrifying as inquisitorial psychers scanning minds en masse for signs of chaos taint. Imagine standing in a crowd as a black-clad inquisitor with a burning equals rosette walks by with his pet psycher's eyes glowing.
Suddenly a few people around you start screaming, their heads literally bursting, or they're racked by convulsions identified as having had unclean thoughts or warp tampering. Those individuals are dragged out. If they're lucky, they're dead already. If not, they soon will be. If a whole town was particularly supportive of the rebellion or a hotbed of cult activity, the Inquisition might declare the entire population beyond redemption. Exterminatus doesn't only mean orbital destruction at ground level. It can mean mass summary execution. Firing lines of Imperial Guard might systematically work through hate block after hate block, executing tens of thousands under inquisitorial order because someone with authority has deemed the area irredeemably corrupted. This is not hyperbole. The Imperium literally has in its doctrine the concept of exterminatus, the death of a world for cases where heresy or alien corruption is terminal. They might not always enact it planet-wide, but they certainly can apply it to a city or continent. The Inquisitor on scene might restrain from blowing up the world if it's deemed salvageable, but
Instance: if 5 guard regiments were deployed, 1 or 2 might be left stationed on planet as a permanent garrison to enforce order. The Adeptus Arbites will certainly rebuild their precinct fortress, bigger and more fortified than before, and expand their presence, since clearly law and order broke down last time. One can easily imagine the Arbites chief saying to new recruits from off-world, "This planet slipped once. It will not slip again on my watch," as he surveys avenues now lined with watchtowers and autocannon emplacements. One can't ignore the possibility that the Imperium decides the world simply isn't worth reintegrating in its current state. If, for example, the rebellion and ensuing battle devastated the environment or the population so badly that recovery is unfeasible, the Administratum might officially classify the planet as extrapitus. In that case, they might evacuate whatever key personnel or resources can be salvaged and then either quarantine the planet or even formally exterminatus it after the fact to eliminate a lingering taint. Imagine that, surviving the war only for a new order to come down that says actually scrub the entire site. It's happened in extreme cases where chaos corruption was thought to linger, or if the world's value was negligible after the war. More commonly though, they'll try to salvage it. Every world is valuable real estate in a galaxy of trillions. For the average surviving citizen, life after the rebellion's suppression is a strange haunted existence. On one hand, the open fighting is done, so there's relief that the shelling has stopped and one might not get shot today. On the other hand, now they live in a conquered city under stern occupation. Curfews are imposed. If the war wrecked food distribution, rationing continues under the watch of armed guards. The streets are patrolled by Imperium troops who might not speak the local dialect and have zero sense of humor. Public gatherings are forbidden except for approved Imperial indoctrination sessions. Anyone even remotely suspected of seditious thought is denounced. Neighbors spy on neighbors either out of newfound fanaticism or just to avoid being accused themselves. It's a very Orwellian atmosphere, constant fear, enforced loyalty. Over time this will probably relax slightly. The Imperium doesn't actually have the manpower to micromanage every street forever, but the first few years, even decades, are extremely repressive. The wider lesson news of the planet's punishment will likely spread intentionally. The Imperium, despite having poor interstellar news in the civilian sense,
does ensure that tales of caution circulate among those who need to hear them. Surrounding worlds' governors might receive a formal notice. Be advised that Planet Redacted attempted to rebel and has been pacified. Its tithe will resume next cycle. The former governor and all co-conspirators have been executed by order of the High Lord's Horse for Segmentum Command. Let this serve as a warning to any who would defy the Emperor's will. Usually that's enough to send shivers down the spine of other would-be malcontents. The Imperium may also dispatch missionaries or propaganda teams to nearby systems to recount the heroic reclamation of the world and the fate of the traitors, just to drive the point home to the masses. It's like heads on pikes along the roadside, but on a galactic scale, demonstrating through one world's ruin what awaits any other that falters. Maybe it's worth considering the dark irony had the rebellious world somehow been left alone by the Imperium. An almost impossible scenario to be sure, but suppose it likely wouldn't prosper in peace. Instead, it would become easy prey for the galaxy's other horrors. An independent human planet without the Emperor's aegis is a juicy target for alien empires and raiders. Orc warlords love nothing more than pouncing on a world that stands alone. Drakari pirates would sense the vulnerability and swoop in to enslave and slaughter. And of course the insidious tendrils of chaos would find fertile ground in a place already willing to defy the Imperium. In short, even if the Emperor's armies didn't punish rebellion, something else would come along to finish the job. There's no real winning for a planet that leaves the Imperium. It's a choice between one type of doom and another. That's the final cruel truth in all of this. Over decades, the planet will either recover or become a shell of its former self, depending on how severe the destruction was. But what's certain is that it will never be quite the same. The scar of rebellion runs deep. The culture may be forcibly reshaped. Holidays commemorating local heroes might be replaced with days of imperial martyrdom and thanksgiving. If the planet had a distinctive name tied to the rebellion, the Imperium might even change that name officially. Typically, they'll just continue calling it by the original name, but always with the mental footnote that place that went traitor in 999 M41 or whenever. Sometimes the administratum does append a suffix like Scundus or Tertius to denote a refounded world after a major purge. One day, generations later, the events will pass from living memory. The rebuilt cities will hum with industry again. The people will go about their lives, and the rebellion will be a chapter in history books, likely a very propagandized chapter. The official imperial version might frame it as a cautionary tale of a few bad actors leading the population astray, only to be righteously punished. They will never admit any imperial fault in causing it, like starvation or oppression. No, it will solely be attributed to heresy, Xenos influence, or personal greed. Schools, if any, will teach children that their forebears sinned and that they must never repeat those mistakes. In a grim way, life returns to the normal of the Imperium: drudgery, duty, and fear of authority, possibly even more intense than before. And what of those who might secretly still hold a grudge? Perhaps a handful of survivors, maybe a young child who watched her parents executed for being rebels, grows up nursing hatred. Maybe years later that child tries to start a small resistance of her own, or just harbors ill will in her heart. But practically there's not much she can do. Not with the eyes of the Arbites and the Inquisition ever present. Some embittered souls might find their way off-world as refugees or stowaways. Those, ironically, could become problems elsewhere. A refugee from a purged world might turn rogue, become a smuggler, or even join a chaos cult out of despair. Basically,
is physically pressing on him. The room falls silent. Even the air recycle units seem to hum quieter, as if shocked. The chief confessor clutches the aquila around his neck and whispers a prayer, whether for guidance or in fear. Who can say? No official vote is taken, but the council's silence and slight nods are enough. The decision is made. The world will say no. Of course they know what will likely come of this. Traven, the PDF commander, immediately doubles patrols around the astropathic choir chambers. They have astropaths who could send a message to Terra or Segmentum authorities about this brewing rebellion. Solari doesn't want that. He visits the choir masters personally, and explains with gentle words, hiding an implicit threat, that they are to stay quiet about the tithe refusal. A few astropaths object. One elderly woman fervently argues that to ignore a direct order from the Lords of Terror is heresy. She is later found dead officially by a sudden psychic backlash. Unofficially, one of Solari's spy masters had her quietly silenced. Word is put out among the remaining astropaths. Keep your mouth shut if you want to live. It's a dangerous play. Without astropathic contact, the world is essentially declaring independence. But Solar hopes that by the time anyone in the Imperium realizes they've gone dark, it'll be too late to matter, or they'll have fixed their population shortfall and can spin a story. Next, Solari and his council prepare for the inevitable confrontation. They don't openly announce we're rebelling, not yet anyway. Instead, they adopt a posture of we simply cannot meet the tithe right now. When the Munitorum tithe ships arrive in orbit a few weeks later, the trouble starts. The administratum officers aboard hail the planet politely at first, shuttle us down to begin processing of the new regiments. They receive a response from the governor's office. Regretfully, we cannot supply those regiments at this time. The orbiting officials are baffled. Such refusal is almost unheard of. They repeat the demand. Solar himself, visibly strained but firm, appears on the Vox to state the same. We cannot comply. Our previous levies have bled us to the bone. By my authority, this world will not be contributing additional regiments until it is secure and stable. The no that will seal his world's fate. The lead administratum tithe officer aboard down from his gilded orbital cutter is apoplectic. He threatens Solari with sanctions with charges of treason. Solari, surrounded in his spire by armed guards, now ends the transmission with a curt, "May the Emperor understand our plight." It's possibly the most blasphemously optimistic hope he could utter. Realizing the gravity, the tithe officer immediately tries to send an astropathic distress call to Segmentum Command. Planet redacted, refusing tithe, possibly an open rebellion. But before that astropath can finish sending, Governor Solari's agents move. In the orbital dock where the tithe ship's astropath sits in her sanctum, a contingent of the planet's PDF storms the chamber. A brief bloody skirmish ensues. Last fire in the dark, screams, and then silence. The astropath lies dead along with a dozen of Solari's troopers.
The psyker managed one psychic scream that liquefied some attackers before being shot through the heart. The tithe officer himself is captured at gunpoint and brought planet-side. This is outright armed sedition now. There's no going back. Governor Solari hadn't wanted bloodshed to start things, but he's pragmatic enough to know that by refusing he crossed the Rubicon. His men detained the administratum delegation and any Imperial personnel on planet, tech priests at the spaceport and navigators at Ashkey, etc. Some cooperate once under guard, others try to resist and are summarily executed. The governor plans to hold the tithe officer and others as leverage, perhaps to bargain later. Please explain to your superiors. We had no choice, he imagines, pleading. That's likely a foolish hope, but at this stage he's grasping at any straw to avoid the worst outcome. At this point, news of the defiance spreads through the planet's hive cities. Rumors fly. The governor is refusing the tithe. We're standing up to the Imperium. In some quarters, fear grips hearts. Loyal Imperial citizens can't believe their leaders would invite Terra's wrath. In other quarters, seditious joy sparks. Factory workers who've lost sons and daughters to the guard tithe quietly cheer in their dormitories, sensing that maybe their sacrifices will finally stop. The chief confessor of the planet issues a conflicted statement urging citizens to remain calm and continue to worship the Emperor, carefully avoiding outright condemnation or support of Solari's decision. He's trying to straddle a very dangerous line. Inevitably, pockets of dissent form. Not everyone agrees with the governor's path. One senior PDF colonel attempts to lead a portion of the army in a move to arrest Solari and hand him over to the Imperial tithe officer, essentially a loyalist counterco. But Commander Traven anticipated this. The colonel and his mutineers are met with force. A firefight erupts in the PDF base courtyard. Loyalist PDF loyal to the Imperium that is shout that Solari is a heretic. Rebel PDF loyal to Solari's orders shout back that they are saving the planet, after a brutal skirmish of lost guns and even a few armored vehicles trading shots across a parade ground. Travaillan's forces crush the Denters. The colonel's charred corpse is hung on a fence with a signed traitor to the planet, an irony that won't age well when the Imperium arrives. Within 48 hours of the initial refusal, Governor Solari and his inner circle have effectively seized total control of the planet's government, silenced Imperial communications, and purged or cowed most internal opposition. The Adeptus Arbites precinct, a fortress of Imperial law in the Hive Center, is the one major holdout. The Arbites there, about 100 judges and enforcers, barricade themselves and broadcast one final message to any Imperial receiver. Planetary government in state of rebellion enforcing Lex Imperialis locally awaiting reinforcement. Then the Arbites shut off external channels and prepare to hold until death. They know they can't take on the whole PDF.
Warner slate. Heresy at home. I can hardly ignore that, she mutters and begins planning accordingly. Back on our rebellious world, a few anxious months pass with no immediate Imperial retaliation. Governor Solari prays, truly prays in the planet's grand cathedral that maybe the Imperium will let them be if they see reason. Perhaps he hopes the administratum will realize the tithe was too high and negotiate or delay. But with each day that hope wanes a little more. The planet is in an anxious limbo, cut off from the usual flow of commerce. No Imperial merchant shipping will approach for fear of being caught in a war zone. Some off-world traders actually do approach the system. Solai rogue traders offering to sell Solari black market weapons or offload surplus food in exchange for promethium or precious minerals. Solari makes a few deals to bolster his arsenal. One rogue trader brings a shipment of old Imperial Army pattern lost guns and even a couple of surplus Hydra flak tanks. These will prove handy when the invasion comes. The irony of the situation. A renegade free trader helping rebels fight the Imperium for profit. About 6 standard months after the initial rebellion, the hammer falls. Without much warning, multiple vessels translate from warp at the edge of the system. There are Imperial Navy, a battleship, 2 cruisers, several escort frigates. Alongside them as a vanguard arrives the strike cruiser of the Iron Talon Space Marines. The moment these ships appear on the planet's long-range augurs, all pretenses end. The Imperium has arrived to collect its due in blood. Panic sweeps through some of the rebel command staff. Solari himself feels a bead of cold sweat run down his temple as the red blips of warships fill the holithic table in his command center. Yet he steels himself. We expected this. Now we must weather it, he says aloud, rallying his officers. Commander Traven straightens his back and starts barking deployment orders. All anti-orbit missiles to ready status. Void shields to maximum output. Fighter squadrons to launch. Above, the Navy fleet establishes orbit with professional swiftness. The rebels' few system ships bravely or foolishly rush out to meet them. A corvette and a retrofitted freighter with macro cannons. The Imperial Navy's response is practically a footnote. A light cruiser and 2 destroyers move ahead, and in a brief exchange of ordnance, the rebel corvette is reduced to an expanding cloud of scrap while the freighter, engines damaged, limps back toward the planet. The Navy does not pursue. There's no need. Instead, they form a blockade perimeter around the world. Admiral Hale, commanding the fleet, sends his own message down to the world, an open vox on all channels. It is Inquisitor Arctis, however, who speaks. Her voice, amplified by the fleet's vox casters, booms over the world's communications. People of this world, by authority of the immortal Emperor and his Holy Inquisition, I declare your planet to be in a state of treasonous rebellion. Governor Solari and all those who have aided this heresy are hereby judged guilty of sedition. Loyal citizens, if any of you remain, know that the Emperor's justice is at hand. To those who have turned from his light, there is nowhere in the galaxy you can hide. Your only chance, and it is a slim one, is immediate and unconditional surrender. Lay down your arms. Deliver your governor and his conspirators bound for execution, and perhaps your population shall be spared utter destruction. If you refuse, prepare to face the Emperor's wrath. Governor Solari listens to this ultimatum from his command bunker deep in the hive spire. The color drains from his face. He had expected a Navy officer to negotiate, perhaps even someone he could reason with, but an Inquisitor, that's a whole different level of doom. His advisory council in the bunker looks to him for guidance. Surrender, try to bargain, or resist. Traven pounds a gauntleted fist on the table. We fight as we planned. We cannot trust any promise from an Inquisitor. She'll execute us all anyway.
Better to sell our lives dearly. Others nod grimly. Solari's mind swims. He realizes his dream of being understood is gone. Now it's about survival, or at least going down fighting. With a heavy heart he agrees. They will resist to the end. The planet's refusal to surrender is answered almost immediately. High above, Admiral Hale gives the order, and the orbital bombardment intensifies. The Navy targets key anti-orbital defenses. First, the giant defense laser silos perched on mountain ranges around the primary hive. Golden lances of energy stab down from the heavens. One by one, those silos erupt in fireballs visible for hundreds of kilometers. The rebels manage to get a few shots off. A defense laser grazes an Imperial cruiser's void shields. Another nearly hits the Iron Talon strike cruiser, which nimbly evades, but it's not enough. Within an hour, the planet's orbital defense grid is shattered. Now the Navy plays surgeon. Precise strikes on communications hubs, power grids and PDF garrisons outside the major cities. Solari's command bunker trembles as a macro cannon shell from orbit obliterates the main PDF headquarters complex 5 kilometers away. Thousands of his best soldiers are vaporized in an instant. He grits his teeth. Those were men he considered friends. Now they are martyrs to his cause, he tells himself. Inquisitor Arctis, observing from the Navy flagship's bridge, is somewhat disappointed. This is going easier than she hoped. A part of her was itching to unleash full exterminatus authority if significant resistance was met. She's a hardliner, that one. Still, she knows the planet has a population in the billions and plenty of potential for ugly surprises. So she restrains herself from overly eager destruction. For now, at last, the orbital barrage relents. Under its cover, dropships and landing craft by the dozens begin their descent. The Iron Talon strike cruiser unleashes its drop pods first, dozens of them screaming through the atmosphere like vengeful meteors. They slam into Hive Solari Primos, the capital, in and around the Governor's Spire and other key installations. Each drop pod's doors explode open and power-armored space marines emerge into the smoke and dust of their impact. The Iron Talons are known for ruthless efficiency. Captain Dagon leads this strike. His orders: capture the Governor alive if possible. The Inquisitor wants a public execution and neutralize any anti-air defenses so the guard landings can proceed unimpeded. The Space Marines encounter stiff resistance in the upper levels of the hive, but it's hopeless for the rebels. In the grand corridors,
Clogged sewer outlets. The air is thick with ash and the tang of ozone from constant fire. The approach to the hive is a colossal highway lined with statues of past Imperial heroes, perfect cover for ambushes. Rebel PDF units have entrenched behind makeshift barricades of sandbags and collapsed HA vehicles with overlapping fields of fire covering the main thoroughfares. As the Morians advance in impeccable ranks, their blue-gray coats vivid even under the smoky sky, they are met with withering fire. Auto-cannon rounds from a fortified HAB block punch through the front rank of guardsmen, spraying gore across the pavement. The Morians step over their fallen comrades and return disciplined volleys at the muzzle flashes in the windows. A rebel heavy bolter nest camouflaged behind a toppled Essica statue opens up. 3 round bursts scythets down half a platoon before a Mordian missile team pivots and sends a rocket screaming into that position, blowing the gunner and his crew apart in a fireball. Street by street, the Morians methodically push forward, but every meter is paid for in blood. Snipers pick off officers whenever they can identify them. The rebels quickly learn to target the ones shouting orders or carrying the banner. One Mian lieutenant loses half his face to a sniper's last shot but refuses evacuation, simply tying a rag over the wound and pressing on with pistol in hand. For the rebels in Hive Secundus, this is their turf. They know every alley and escape route. They pop out of sewer grates behind Imperial squads to lob grenades, then disappear into maintenance shafts to set up the next ambush. The Iron Guard, unflappable, adjust by deploying flamethrower teams at every junction. Now when a rebel cell tries a sneak attack, they often find themselves greeted by a sudden blast of jellied promethium that turns their hiding place into an inferno. The screams of burning insurgents echo through underhive tunnels. Slowly but surely the Imperial forces advance block by block, leaving behind a trail of spent shells and burning ruins. It's here in Hive Secundus that the conflict takes a bizarre turn. Remember that cult Inquisitor Arctis had been originally headed to investigate. It turns out her instincts were correct. A chaos cult had taken root in the underhive of Secundus long before the rebellion, festering among despairing manufacturing workers. The upheaval of the rebellion is exactly what they were waiting for. As the Loyalist Guard forces and rebel PDFs slug it out above, these heretics decide to make their move. Enacting profane rites in the depths of the Hive sump, they manage to tear open a small warp rift in the bowels of the city. Suddenly, amidst the street fighting up top, a new horror emerges, gibbering lesser demons of Khorne, scarlet-skinned, horned and slavering, spilling up from sewers and maintenance shafts, attacking anyone they find. Loyalist or rebel doesn't matter to them. The battle for Hive Secundus turns into a three-way slaughterhouse. Rebel soldiers, thinking the Imperials somehow unleashed demons as a terror weapon, start to panic or accuse prisoners of witchcraft. Imperial guardsmen, knowing these things must be chaos-spawned, grit their teeth and fight the demons even as they push toward rebel positions. Inquisitor Arctis catches the psychic stink of the warp breach and immediately diverts her personal retinue and an accompanying Grey Knight squad. She anticipated such a possibility and had requested a team of these elite demon hunters. The Grey Knights drop into the lower levels of Secundus like silver comets. In brutal close combat amid flickering lumen globes and steaming pipes, they hack out the knot of cultists and slowly force the warp rift closed with sanctified force and psychic might. It's not an easy fight. 2 Grey Knights fall to a hulking bloodletter demon before it's banished. But ultimately they contain the outbreak. Arctis, observing the carnage, doesn't hesitate now. She issues an order of exterminatus on Hive Secundus, a controlled limited one, as contradictory as that sounds. Specifically, she commands Admiral Hale to lance strike the lower hive to purge any remaining demonic taint. Hale obliges. From orbit, precise lance beams spear down once more, but this time they're aimed into the gaping wounds of the lower city. Entire sublevels of the hive vaporize in searing white fire, collapsing parts of the structure. Thousands of rebels and unfortunately some Imperial troops caught in those lower levels are incinerated along with any lingering demons. The hive city, though not completely destroyed, is effectively cleaved at its base. The upper spires tilt and sag but remain partially intact. This horrifying display breaks the rebel defense of Secundus, cut off literally from the ground and witnessing what looked to them like the wrath of God. They don't know the specifics, only that shafts of light from the heavens obliterated half the city.
The remaining PDF there lose heart. Many throw down arms. Many more flee into the ash wastes or surrender to the first Imperial patrols they find. Within 72 hours of the Imperial invasion beginning, organized rebel resistance is effectively over. Hive Primus is secured, its governor captured, its defenses infiltrated by Marines and then flooded with guard units who methodically clear building after building. Hive Secundus is effectively neutralized by Exterminatus light and ground assault, and smaller settlements and mining outposts see short firefights as pockets of PDF either give up or get swiftly overwhelmed by superior Imperial force. The casualty list is immense. The planet's surface in many places is scorched and pockmarked with craters and mass graves. Millions of civilians who couldn't hide well enough were killed in crossfire or bombardments. Entire Haiti blocks are collapsed. In the main hive, fires rage uncontrolled for days after, turning the sky above into a black haze. Inquisitor Arctus wastes no time rounding up what's left of the rebel leadership. Governor Solari is hauled before her in the ruined Grand Plaza of Hive Primus, which now serves as an open-air tribunal arena. He's battered, bruised, but conscious. To her slight surprise, he doesn't plead for mercy or recant his actions. In fact, as she pronounces him guilty of heresy and sentences him to death, he speaks out, voice but clear, so that nearby survivors and an audio recorder served her can hear. I only ever wanted to save my people, if that be heresy. I go to my grave with a clear conscience that I tried to spare them from your cruelty. Arctus gives a thin, hard smile and responds, your misguidance spared nothing. Look around you. This is the result of your defiance. Solari does look. The shattered buildings, the piles of corpses being gathered by labor gangs under Imperial gunpoint. A tear actually rolls down his cheek. Perhaps he realizes she's right. His choice led here. Or perhaps he just mourns how it ended. Either way, the Inquisitor is unmoved. With a nod, she signals Captain Dadden. The Space Marine draws his bolt pistol and without ceremony puts a round through Solari's skull. Thus ends the Governor's life. In the following weeks, the Imperial forces secure every inch of the planet. Inquisitor Arctus's agents and the Victorious Guard conduct sweeps for any remaining rebel officers or collaborators. Hundreds are identified and executed on the spot. The chief confessor who tried to stay neutral is found weeping in his cathedral. Arctus deems him unreliable and has him shipped off-world in chains to be tried for negligence. Commander Trovan, the firebrand PDF leader, actually survived the war up to that point. He'd been leading a guerrilla holdout in the Underhive ruins. Once Solari was dead, Trovan attempted to continue fighting, but Grey Knights flushed his cell out. Trovan died gun in hand, cut in half by a storm bolter burst. His corpse was dragged to the surface and hung on a post as a symbolic execution after the fact. All rebel propaganda is torn down and replaced with Imperial edicts. The populace, what's left of it, is gathered in mass atonement ceremonies led by newly arrived ecclesiarchy priests who accompany the fleet. Many of these people are disoriented, grieving and terrified. They don't even resist when the priests command them to their knees to beg the Emperor's forgiveness. In truth, many are begging not just to the Emperor but to the Imperials around them to spare their lives. Inquisitor Arctus has a difficult choice. The planet is ravaged but still potentially useful. She could recommend Exterminatus to make a pure example, but that would be wasteful, and the main objectives, punish rebels, retrieve the tithe and blood, are achieved. Instead, she tasks Admiral Hale with staying in orbit a few months longer to enforce order and sends requests for administratum and mechanicus teams to come begin reconstruction and resource assessment. The post-war casualty reports indicate perhaps 1/5 of the planet's population died in the short rebellion and its suppression. Another 1/5 if are injured or maimed. The rest, well, they're now very chastened Imperial subjects once again. Before departing, Inquisitor Arctis and Captain Dunn organize one final spectacle. In the same plaza where Solari was executed, they erect makeshift gallows and chopping blocks. Over 100 rebel officials, those who survived capture, are executed in a single day of blood and fanfare. Some are hanged, some beheaded. Some, the worst heretics like the discovered chaos cult leaders, are burned alive or rendered into bubbling slime by promethium sprayed from flamers. The gathered citizens are forced to watch as their former leaders are systematically obliterated. Any lingering sympathy is drowned in the horror of it. For the Imperium, this is a necessary coda to the rebellion, establishing beyond doubt who's in charge and what happens to traitors. The shattered world remains under martial law for years afterward. The Imperium renames it, though it once bore Solari's family name. All official records now simply designate it with a stern new title, something like Penitent Primus or an alphanumeric code. A new governor, imported from off-world of course, arrives with a full regiment of fresh troops as permanent garrison. They rebuild the hive infrastructure enough to resume mining and manufacturing. The surviving citizens toil extra shifts to meet not only normal tithes but additional reparation tithes imposed to pay for the resources expended during their pacification. In the years to come, the planet slowly rebuilds under the Imperium's stern gaze. The scars of war remain. Entire districts of the capital hive are cordoned off due to lingering radiation or unstable rubble, but new manufacturing lines open up amid the ruins, and the surviving populace is taxed and tithed harder than ever to make up for lost output. Each week, mandatory prayer sessions are held in the reforged central cathedral, where the new ecclesiarchy priests ensure everyone loudly proclaims their renewed loyalty. The local news-picked feeds, now controlled by an Imperial censure board, broadcast heroic tales of the Imperial Guard regiments who liberated the world and denounced the former administration as vile heretics who led everyone astray. Over time, many of the ordinary citizens, worn down by toil and constant propaganda, internalize the narrative. It becomes common to hear even those who once muttered dissent saying things like, "We're grateful the Emperor took us back." Public memory reshapes itself. The dead rebels are not martyrs to reminisce about, they're criminals to be forgotten. In this way, the Imperium doesn't just defeat the rebellion in body but in spirit. By the next generation, the very idea of defying the Emperor is virtually unthinkable among the populace. Fear and indoctrination have done their work. Thus ends the saga of a single world that dared to say no. Its cities lie in ruins, its soil soaked with the blood of its people and their conquerors. But the Imperium of Man stands intact and unyielding. The world itself, it will be allowed to limp onward, rebuilt under watchful eyes, serving once more as a cog in the great imperial machine, admonished, humbled, and forever fearful of the Emperor's wrath that nearly wiped it from the stars. This hypothetical saga we've traced isn't unique. Countless systems throughout history have flirted with the same folly and met similar fates. It always ends in ruins and repentance if anyone is left to repent. For every planet like our example, there are hundreds more that never dare raise the banner of revolt, and perhaps that is the true goal of the Imperial response. The charred remains of one defiant world serve to keep 100 others in line. Fear is the Emperor's greatest weapon, and its echo reverberates from each punished world to 10,000 others. So what ultimately happens when an Imperial world rejects the Emperor? Nothing good and usually nothing left. A planet's defiance is answered with overwhelming brutal certainty. Its cities burn, its leaders are slain, and its population is either brought to heel in chains or consigned to oblivion. In the end, the rebellion is not just crushed, it is erased, made into a morbid lesson for other worlds. The Emperor's will is reasserted at any cost. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only one fate for those who say no to the God Emperor. Sooner or later, utter destruction. As sure as night follows day. In the Imperium of Man, betrayal isn't just a crime. It's a death sentence for planets as much as for